I still remember the cold metallic scent of his loaded Beretta, mixed with his signature Tom Ford cologne. Taylor Rossi looked me dead in the eye, the man who had ruthlessly claimed every inch of my life for 3 long years, and sneered, "You mean nothing to me." He thought those words would break me into submission. Instead, they shattered my illusions and set me free. What he didn't know was that the moment I walked out that door, I would take his sanity with me, and he would burn New York to the ground just to find my ghost. To understand how a man like Taylor Rossi could tear a city apart for a woman he claimed to despise, you have to understand how I ended up in his bed and his ledger in the first place. My name is Alex Hayes. 3 years ago, I was a senior forensic accountant at a prestigious Manhattan firm, tasked with auditing a string of seemingly legitimate import-export businesses. I was brilliant, meticulous, and incredibly naive. I found a multi-million-dollar discrepancy in the books of a company owned by Rossi Enterprises. Instead of taking it to the authorities, I brought it to my boss. 24 hours later, my boss was missing, and I was sitting across a mahogany desk from Taylor Rossi himself. Taylor was a man carved from marble and violence. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet authority rolling off his broad shoulders was enough to suffocate a room. He gave me a choice. I could disappear like my boss, or I could work for him, utilizing my unique talents to clean his money permanently. I chose to live. For 3 years, I lived in a gilded cage. I was moved into his sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side. I was given limitless credit cards, designer wardrobes, and an army of guards led by his fiercely loyal right-hand man, Vincent Gallo. But I was a prisoner, and the cruelest part of my captivity was that over those 3 years, the lines began to blur. Late-night strategy sessions over whiskey turned into stolen touches. Threats turned into possessive, suffocating embraces. Taylor claimed my body with the same ruthless efficiency he used to claim his territories, but he guarded his heart behind an impenetrable wall of ice. I fooled myself into believing I saw cracks in that ice. I thought the way he held me when he was wounded, or the way he once nearly beat a rival boss to death just for looking at me too long, meant something. I thought I was more than just a convenient asset and a warm body. The delusion ended on a rainy Tuesday in November. It was the night of the annual Syndicate Gala, a high society front where the worst criminals in the city wore tuxedos and shook hands with politicians. Taylor had been distant all week, locked in his study, dealing with whispers of a coup from the rival Moretti family. That night, an Italian heiress named Isabella Costa, a woman from a powerful Mafia bloodline, and a woman Taylor had once been betrothed to, made a surprise appearance. I watched from the shadows of the ballroom as Taylor greeted her. There was a familiarity there, a shared history of blood and power that I, a civilian accountant, could never touch. Later that evening, unable to bear the whispers of the other Mafia wives, who looked at me like a disposable plaything, I cornered Taylor in his private study. "What are we, Taylor?" My voice trembled, despite my desperate attempt to keep it steady. "Isabella is parading around out there, like she owns you. The whispers, they say you're going to marry her to secure the ports." Taylor didn't look up from his tumbler of scotch. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights reflecting in his dark, predatory eyes. "You are questioning me, Alex?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I'm asking where I stand." I snapped, stepping closer. "I've given you 3 years. I've cleaned your ledgers. I've kept you out of federal prison. I've shared your bed." "I love you, Taylor." The words hung in the air, heavy and pathetic. Taylor slowly turned around. His face was an emotionless mask, wiped clean of any of the midnight tenderness I thought I had earned. He walked slowly toward me, his imposing frame casting a long shadow that swallowed me whole. He stopped mere inches away, reached out and let his knuckles graze my cheek. The touch was ice cold. Love, he murmured the word sounding like a curse on his tongue. A liability, a weakness I cannot afford, and a fantasy you cannot afford. Taylor, please. His hand dropped, and his eyes hardened into obsidian stones. Let us be entirely clear, Alex, so we never have this tiresome conversation again. You are here because you are useful. You are in my bed because you are convenient. If you think there is anything more to this arrangement, you are a fool. Isabella brings power. You bring a calculator. You mean nothing to me. The sneer on his lips was the final twist of the knife. It didn't just break my heart, it cauterized it. In that split second, the terrified captive died, and a survivor was born. Understood, I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I turned and walked out of the study. I didn't cry. You don't cry when you realize you're standing in a burning house. You find the exit. When a man like Taylor Rossi controls your life, you don't just pack a suitcase and call an Uber. Every driver, every doorman, every camera in the city reports to him. To leave him meant I had to die, figuratively speaking. I had to become a ghost. What Taylor failed to realize when he reduced me to a mere calculator was that the person who controls the numbers controls the empire. For 2 years I had been preparing for a rainy day. I was terrified of the FBI, of rival families of Taylor himself. So I had slowly, meticulously skimmed the unskimmable. I routed fractions of pennies from millions of illicit transactions through a labyrinth of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, routing them eventually into an untraceable offshore trust. I had the funds. Now I needed the exit. I waited 3 weeks after the gala. I played the part of the chastised, obedient pet perfectly. I didn't bring up Isabella. I didn't ask questions. I did my work. I smiled at his business dinners, and I lay perfectly still in his bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept, counting down the hours. My opportunity came when Taylor had to fly to Miami to meet with a Colombian cartel supplier. He would be gone for exactly 48 hours. Vincent Gallo, his terrifying shadow, stayed behind to keep an eye on operations, and on me. The night Taylor's private jet took off, I put my plan into motion. I had previously bribed a mid-level enforcer who had a gambling problem, a man named Ricky, to secure a burner phone, and a meeting with a legendary underground forger known only as Elias Fletcher. Elias charged me a small fortune, but he provided me with a flawless new identity, Chloe Jenkins, a new passport, a new driver's license, a new social security number, all completely backstopped. At 2 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday, the penthouse was quiet. Vincent and the guards were stationed in the lobby and the hallway outside my door, relying on the state-of-the-art biometric security system to keep me locked inside. But I was the one who paid the security firm's invoices. I knew the backdoor codes to the system. I left the custom-made designer dresses in the closet. I left the Birkin bags. I walked over to the vanity and removed the 3-carat diamond necklace Taylor had given me for my birthday. I laid it on top of a printed financial ledger. Across the top of the ledger, I wrote 3 words in red ink: I mean nothing. I wore plain black leggings, a dark hoodie, and comfortable running shoes. I bypassed the retinal scanner on the private service elevator, using an administrative override code I had memorized 6 months ago. The elevator descended directly into the subterranean maintenance tunnels of the building, a route used exclusively by the building's sanitation crew. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I navigated the damp concrete corridors. Every shadow looked like one of Taylor's soldiers. Every dripping pipe sounded like a footstep. I emerged 3 blocks away through a steam vent grate in a dark alley. I didn't hail a cab. I walked 12 blocks in the freezing rain to a 24-hour diner, went into the bathroom, cut off my long blonde hair with a pair of shears I'd brought with me, and dyed it a harsh, unyielding black. I put in brown contact lenses, altering the striking blue eyes Taylor had once claimed to be obsessed with. When I walked out of that bathroom, Alex Hayes was dead. I took the subway to Port Authority, bought a bus ticket to Philadelphia under a fake name using cash, and then immediately walked out the back entrance and hired a private, unlicensed courier service to drive me to a small airstrip in New Jersey. By the time the sun rose over the New York skyline, I was boarding a private charter flight to a small, sleepy coastal town in Oregon. As the plane broke through the clouds, the adrenaline finally receded, leaving behind a crashing wave of exhaustion and hollow grief. I had escaped the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. I was free. But as I looked out the window at the endless expanse of the country, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Taylor was a man who owned things, and Taylor didn't lose what belonged to him. I wasn't there to see the explosion, but the shockwaves made national news. According to the whispers on the encrypted forums I still monitored, Taylor returned from Miami 12 hours early. He walked into the penthouse expecting to find his obedient accountant. Instead, he found the silent, empty rooms, the severed security feeds, and the diamond necklace resting on the ledger. Those 3 words, "I mean nothing," were the match that lit the powder keg. Vincent Gallo later told a trusted associate who leaked it to the underground network that Taylor didn't shout when he saw the note. He stood perfectly still for 5 full minutes, his face completely devoid of color, staring at my handwriting. Then he picked up the mahogany chair sitting next to the vanity and smashed it against the reinforced glass window with such violent, feral force that the chair splintered into 100 pieces. Taylor's cold, calculating demeanor vanished. The man who prided himself on absolute control completely unraveled. In his twisted, possessive mind, he could not fathom that I had outsmarted him and left of my own volition. He immediately concluded that I had been taken, and there was only one family bold enough to strike at the heart of his empire, the Morettis. Within 4 hours of my disappearance, the streets of New York turned into a war zone. Taylor mobilized every soldier enforcer and hitman on his payroll. He didn't ask for a meeting with Leonardo Moretti. He didn't send an emissary. At 9 p.m. that night, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the Moretti family's most lucrative underground casino in Brooklyn. Taylor's men didn't wear masks. They walked in with automatic weapons and leveled the place, burning it to the ground. Taylor himself kicked in the door of Leonardo Moretti's private estate the following night. Rumor had it he dragged Leonardo out of his bed by his hair, put the barrel of his Beretta halfway down the rival boss's throat, and demanded to know where I was. Leonardo, bleeding and utterly bewildered, swore on his mother's grave that he knew nothing about Alex Hayes. Taylor shot him in the kneecap anyway, a brutal warning to the rest of the underworld. The city was paralyzed by the sudden, explosive violence. The mayor was screaming at the police commissioner, the FBI was scrambling to mobilize task forces, and the civilian population was terrified by the bodies of Mafia foot soldiers turning up in the East River. The fragile peace treaty that had governed the 5 boroughs for a decade was shredded in less than 48 hours. Taylor was interrogating anyone who had ever looked at me. He hunted down the mid-level enforcer, Ricky, who had bought my burner phone. When Taylor found out Ricky had helped me, he didn't just kill him. He made an agonizing, drawn-out, public spectacle of him in a warehouse in Queens, ensuring every man in his syndicate heard Ricky's screams. He hired the best private military contractors, the most ruthless hackers, and the most connected fixers in the country. He put a $10 million bounty on my head, alive and unharmed. Unharmed. That was the strict condition. If a single hair on my head was out of place, the person who brought me in would die a slow death. 3,000 miles away, in a tiny coastal town in Oregon, I sat in a modest, rain-battered rental cottage, sipping cheap coffee and watching the news on a small CRT television. The headline scrolling across the bottom of CNN read, "Unprecedented mob violence rocks. NYC dozens dead in suspected gang war." My hands trembled violently, rattling the coffee mug against the saucer. He was tearing the city apart. The man who looked at me like I was a stain on his shoe, the man who told me I was nothing but a convenient asset, was burning his own empire to the ground just to find me. It wasn't love. I knew that. It was possession. It was ego. I was the one thing he couldn't control, the one variable in his ledger he couldn't balance. As I watched footage of a burning warehouse, a warehouse I knew belonged to the Morettis, my burner phone buzzed on the table. It was a secure encrypted message from Elias Fletcher, the forger. Message they traced the New Jersey flight. "He knows you went west. Move now." My blood ran cold. I had a 4-day head start, and Taylor was already closing the gap. I grabbed my pre-packed duffel bag, threw the burner phone into the burning fireplace, and walked out into the pouring Oregon rain. The game of hide-and-seek had just begun, and the devil himself was it. The Oregon rain battered the windshield of the rusted 1998 Honda Civic I had purchased with $3,000 in crumpled $100 bills from a mechanic in Medford. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm, stale air that smelled faintly of cheap tobacco and damp dog, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My knuckles were bone white as I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes darting obsessively between the slick, winding asphalt of Interstate 5 and the rear-view mirror. Every pair of headlights that lingered too long behind me sent a fresh spike of adrenaline straight into my heart. Taylor Rossi was not just a Mafia boss. He was an institution. He had resources that rivaled small nations. I knew for a fact he retained former CIA operatives through private intelligence firms like Praetorian Solutions, utilizing military-grade tracking software, including Palantir databases and Pegasus spyware to monitor cellular networks. That was why my burner phone was currently at the bottom of the Willamette River, and why I was navigating solely by a tattered Rand McNally road atlas, illuminated by the dim, flickering dome light of the Civic. I was officially a ghost, but ghosts don't leave trails of aviation fuel. Elias Fletcher's warning echoed in my skull. They traced the New Jersey flight. Taylor's men were already in the Pacific Northwest, tearing through flight manifests and bribing fixed-base operators. I had to move east into the sprawling, empty expanse of the American West, where cameras were sparse, and a woman with black hair and a fake ID could vanish into the dust. For 3 days, I drove like a machine, fueled by sheer terror and gas station caffeine. I slept in 2-hour increments in the back seat, parked behind abandoned strip malls or wedged between massive 18-wheelers at desolate truck stops in Nevada. My diet consisted of stale protein bars and lukewarm water. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Taylor's face, not the sneering, cold mask he had worn in his study, but the feral, unhinged predator the underground chatter had described. He was burning New York to find me. The guilt of the collateral damage the foot soldiers, the rival casino workers, the innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of his vendetta gnawed at my conscience, but survival instinct drowned it out. If he caught me, I wouldn't just be killed. I would be caged, broken, and stripped of the very soul I had just reclaimed. By the time I reached a dilapidated roadside motel on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada, exhaustion was causing visual hallucinations. The neon sign buzzed like a dying hornet, missing half its letters. I paid for 3 nights in cash under the name Sarah Miller, keeping my head down and my dark hair pulled tightly beneath a plain baseball cap. The room smelled of bleach and desperation, but it had a deadbolt, a chain, and a window that opened to an alleyway. I collapsed onto the sagging mattress, intending to sleep for 12 hours. But my brain, wired by 3 years of surviving Taylor's world, refused to shut down. I lay there staring at the water stains on the ceiling, the silence of the room deafening. Running wasn't going to be enough. Taylor had an army, unlimited funds, and a burning, obsessive pride. He would comb the earth until he found me. Hiding was just delaying the inevitable. If I wanted to truly survive, I had to do the one thing no one had ever dared to do to the Rossi family. I had to strike back. I had to cripple the beast so profoundly that it could no longer hunt. I pulled a heavily encrypted military-grade laptop from my duffel bag, a piece of hardware I had smuggled out of Rossi Enterprises months ago in preparation for my escape. I booted it up, routing my connection through a complex chain of VPNs and proxy servers bouncing from Iceland to Switzerland to Singapore. I knew Taylor's empire better than he did. He knew the blood, the bullets, and the street-level economics. I knew the algorithms. I knew the shell companies registered in Delaware, the offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands, and the numbered accounts at Credit Suisse that washed his heroin money into legitimate real estate capital. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. I logged into the primary administrative portal of his holding company. I didn't just steal money. I had already secured my own retirement. This was about sabotage. I started by quietly freezing the operating accounts of 3 of his largest legitimate fronts, a massive shipping logistics firm in Brooklyn, a chain of boutique hotels in Manhattan, and a waste management monopoly in New Jersey. I triggered automated IRS compliance flags on his secondary shell companies, practically gift-wrapping probable cause for the federal government. Then I initiated a series of cascading wire transfers, moving tens of millions of dollars from his heavily guarded offshore accounts into dozens of randomized, decentralized cryptocurrency wallets. I was draining his lifeblood. It took 6 hours of grueling, non-stop coding. When I finally hit execute on the final script, I felt a twisted sense of triumph. For 3 years, he had told me I was nothing but a calculator. Now that calculator was bankrupting the most feared Mafia boss on the eastern seaboard. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had just declared thermonuclear war. A sudden sharp sound shattered the silence of the motel room. It was the crunch of gravel outside my window. Every muscle in my body locked into place. I didn't breathe. I slipped silently off the bed, creeping toward the window, pressing my back against the peeling wallpaper. I peered through a tiny slit in the faded curtains. 2 black Cadillac Escalades were idling in the motel parking lot, their headlights cut. 4 men were stepping out. They weren't local cops, and they weren't random thugs. They wore tailored black overcoats, their movements terrifyingly precise, military bred. I recognized the man leading them instantly. The sharp aquiline profile, the cold, dead eyes. Vincent Gallo. My blood turned to ice. Taylor's right-hand man. The apex predator of the Rossi family. How had they found me? I had dumped the phone, changed the car, used cash. The laptop, I realized with a sickening jolt. The moment I logged into the offshore accounts, despite the proxies, Taylor's cybersecurity team must have caught a microsecond ping of my IP address before it bounced. I had traded my location for my financial strike. Footsteps echoed on the exterior walkway, heavy, deliberate. They were coming for room 114. Panic threatened to paralyze me, but the survivor inside me took the wheel. I grabbed my duffel bag, shoving the laptop inside. I slung the strap across my chest and moved to the small, grimy bathroom. The footsteps stopped directly outside my front door. "Alex?" Vincent's voice seeped through the cheap wood, smooth and completely devoid of warmth. "Taylor wants you to come home. Open the door, and I promise you won't be hurt. Make me break it down, and I can't guarantee your comfort on the flight back to New York." I didn't answer. I climbed silently into the bathtub and reached for the small frosted glass window above the showerhead. It was painted shut, rusted, from years of neglect. Crack! The sound of a heavy boot slamming against the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. The doorframe splintered. I grabbed the heavy porcelain lid off the toilet tank. Crack! The deadbolt gave way with a metallic shriek. I swung the porcelain lid directly into the frosted glass window. The glass shattered, raining down into the tub. I threw my duffel bag through the jagged opening, ignoring the sharp edges that sliced into my forearms as I hauled myself up. "She's in the bathroom!" a voice yelled from the main room. I squeezed through the window frame, dropping heavily into the dark, trash-strewn alleyway behind the motel. I hit the asphalt hard, my ankle rolling agonizingly, but I bit down on my lip to stifle a scream. I grabbed my bag and ran limping frantically into the freezing Nevada night, disappearing into the shadows just as the bathroom door inside was kicked off its hinges. The ghost had survived, but the hunter was closing in. I didn't stop running until I reached Chicago. I abandoned the Honda Civic at a Greyhound station in Reno, boarded a bus to Salt Lake City, stole a license plate off a parked truck to put on a cash-bought used Ford Taurus, and drove continuously until the towering, wind-battered skyline of Chicago rose from the flat Midwestern plains. I needed a dense urban environment, a concrete jungle where millions of data points collided every second, providing the perfect digital camouflage. I rented a cash-only loft in the gritty industrial sector of the West Loop, operating under the name Emily Vance. The loft was sparse, exposed, brick, drafty windows, and absolutely no furniture, save for a folding table and a cheap mattress on the floor. It was a far cry from the opulent silk sheets and panoramic views of Taylor's Manhattan penthouse, but it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen, because it belonged solely to me. My near-death experience in Reno had fundamentally shifted the dynamic of this war. Taylor wasn't just relying on brute force, he had weaponized his intelligence network, but I had wounded him. The financial viruses I had planted in Nevada were now fully gestating within the Rossi Enterprises mainframe. I spent the next 48 hours building my command center. I purchased 3 high-powered laptops from different electronics stores across the city, paying in cash and wearing a medical mask to obscure my face from CCTV cameras. I rigged them together, creating a localized, heavily encrypted network that utilized Tor routing protocols and decentralized proxy chaining. I tapped back into the underground chatter to gauge the damage. The dark web forums were burning with rumors. Rossi Enterprises was hemorrhaging capital. The federal government, tipped off by the IRS compliance flags I had triggered, had raided the New Jersey waste management front. Taylor's Colombian suppliers were threatening to sever ties because millions of dollars in payments had vanished into the ether of the blockchain. Taylor was bleeding, and the sharks were circling. The Moretti family, still recovering from Taylor's unhinged assault, were beginning to push back, sensing weakness in the once impenetrable armor of the Rossi syndicate. But Taylor's reaction to the financial devastation was not what I expected. According to an intercepted encrypted memo from a high-ranking lieutenant, Taylor had not flown into another blind rage when he realized I was systematically dismantling his empire. Instead, a terrifying silent calm had washed over him. He had called off the street-level warfare in New York. He recalled his foot soldiers. He realized I was not a terrified girl running blindly into the dark. I was a sovereign threat. For 3 years he had underestimated me, treating me like a decorative accessory that happened to know Excel. Now he was experiencing the full devastating force of my intellect. The chatter suggested his fury had mutated into something far more dangerous, a twisted obsessive reverence. He no longer just wanted to possess me. He wanted to conquer the woman who was currently beating him at his own game. I sat in the freezing Chicago loft, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching lines of code scroll across my monitors. I was preparing the final blow. I called it the guillotine protocol. I had spent my captivity mapping the intricate, deeply hidden trust funds Taylor kept for his inner circle, the untraceable retirement accounts for his capos, his enforcers, and Vincent Gallo. It was the money that bought their absolute loyalty. If I wiped those accounts, Taylor wouldn't just lose money. He would lose his army. A mob boss without loyal soldiers is a dead man walking. I had my finger hovering over the execute button when a secure encrypted email bypassed my firewall and popped up on my center screen. My breath hitched. The subject line was empty. The sender address was a randomly generated string of alphanumeric characters. I opened it. There was a single high-resolution image attached. My blood froze in my veins, a sickening wave of nausea crashing over me. The image was of Elias Fletcher, the legendary forger who had created my new identity. He was tied to a steel chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. He was beaten beyond recognition, his face a swollen, bloody mask. Standing behind him, looking directly into the camera lens with dead, soulless eyes, was Vincent Gallo. Below the image was a single line of text he held out longer than most. But everyone breaks. See you soon, Alex. I pushed my chair back so violently it crashed to the floor. I stumbled backward, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle a sob. Elias was dead. And because Elias had built my identity, Vincent knew everything. He knew about Chloe Jenkins. He knew about the passports. He knew the aliases. The proximity alarm on my secondary laptop began to shriek a high-pitched, piercing wail that echoed off the brick walls of the loft. I rushed to the screen. My customized intrusion detection software was flagging a massive spike in cellular triangulation in my immediate vicinity. They weren't just pinging my IP address. They had deployed a Stingray device, a fake cell tower simulator, used by the FBI and high-tier military contractors to sweep the entire West Loop grid, locking onto the unique IMEI signature of my encrypted modem. They were here, in Chicago, within a 3-mile radius. The sheer suffocating weight of Taylor Rossi's power pressed down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. I had run 3,000 miles. I had burned his money, exposed his fronts, and taught like a demon to claw my way out of his shadow. But he was a leviathan. He commanded forces I couldn't physically fight. I looked at the execute button for the guillotine protocol. If I pressed it, Taylor's empire would collapse. His men would turn on him. He would be dead within a month, but it wouldn't save me today. Vincent Gallo would be coming through my door in less than 10 minutes, and Vincent didn't care about the bank accounts. He only cared about bringing Taylor his prize. I needed a shield, not just a sword. I needed leverage that required me to be breathing. My fingers flew across the keyboard with frantic, desperate speed. I abandoned the guillotine protocol. Instead, I initiated a dead man's switch. I took every single megabyte of data I possessed, the ledgers, the offshore account numbers, the names of corrupt politicians on Taylor's payroll, the GPS coordinates of the cartel drops, and bundled it into a massive, heavily encrypted dossier. I linked the dossier to a secure, decentralized server hosted in Switzerland. Then I tied the server to an automated, timed release mechanism. I had exactly 24 hours. If I did not log into the server and input a 40-character alphanumeric passcode within 24 hours, the server would automatically blast the entire dossier to the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, the New York Times, and the heads of the 5 rival Mafia families. It would be the absolute, unequivocal annihilation of Taylor Rossi, his legacy, and everyone associated with him. The upload progress bar crawled across the screen. 70%. 80%. Outside, the distant, ominous wail of a siren pierced the Chicago night, followed by the unmistakable squeal of tires on wet pavement just a block away. 90%. 95%. I heard the heavy steel door at the ground floor of the loft building groan in protest as it was violently wrenched open. The rhythmic, terrifying thud of heavy boots began to echo up the industrial stairwell. 99%. 100%. Upload complete. Timer initiated. 23:59:59. I exhaled a shaky breath, the adrenaline giving way to a strange, icy calm. I disconnected the laptops, pulled the hard drives and smashed them repeatedly with a hammer until they were nothing but jagged shards of metal and silicon. I tossed the debris out the window into the alley below. I didn't run this time. There was nowhere left to run. I walked to the center of the empty loft, smoothed down the front of my black sweater, and stood perfectly still, my chin held high. I was no longer the terrified captive in the penthouse. I was the architect of Taylor Rossi's destruction, and I held the detonator in my mind. The heavy wooden door of my loft exploded inward in a shower of splinters and torn hinges. 6 heavily armed men flooded the room, their weapons trained directly on my chest. The laser sights painted a cluster of red dots over my heart. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. The men parted, and Vincent Gallo stepped through the ruined doorway. His tailored suit was immaculate, his face an emotionless mask of lethal intent. He looked around the empty room, his eyes landing on the smashed laptop casings on the floor, and then finally resting on me. "Alex," Vincent said, his voice a chilling monotone. "It's time to go." I looked him dead in the eye, a cold, humorless smile touching the corner of my lips. "Hello, Vincent." I replied, my voice steady, ringing with an authority I had stolen directly from the man who taught me how to be ruthless. "Take me to him. We have a lot to discuss." The flight back to New York was a masterclass in suffocating silence. I sat opposite Vincent Gallo in the lavish leather cabin of Taylor's private Gulfstream jet. Vincent did not offer me water. He did not offer me food. He simply sat like a statuesque gargoyle, his dark eyes tracking my every breath. Before, under Taylor's roof, Vincent's gaze had always been one of thinly veiled contempt, the way a wolf looks at a sheep that has somehow managed to wander into the den. Now, however, the contempt was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, clinical wariness. He was no longer looking at a pet. He was looking at a live grenade with the pin pulled out. My wrists were not bound. I was not blindfolded. I didn't need to be. The invisible chains of Taylor Rossi's staggering power were meant to be enough to keep me tethered to my seat. I spent the 2-hour flight staring out the reinforced acrylic window, watching the sprawling tapestry of the American Midwest give way to the jagged, imposing coastline of the eastern seaboard. I was flying directly back into the mouth of the beast, but my heartbeat was astonishingly slow, rhythmic, and perfectly calm. We landed at a private airstrip on Long Island, under the cloak of a brutal, unforgiving thunderstorm. Rain lashed against the tarmac in angry diagonal sheets. A convoy of 3 armored SUVs was waiting, their engines rumbling in low, predatory growls. The drive to the Rossi family's heavily fortified waterfront compound took 45 minutes. Every inch of the property was designed to scream insurmountable wealth and untouchable dominance. 10-foot iron gates swung open, revealing a sprawling Gothic revival mansion constructed from imported black stone. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with suppressed assault rifles strapped across their tactical vests. As I stepped out of the vehicle and into the pouring rain, the heavily armed men paused. They looked at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and deep-seated apprehension. They knew exactly what I had done. They knew I had single-handedly crippled their invincible boss, frozen their offshore accounts, and drawn the blistering heat of the federal government down upon their operations. I walked through the towering oak double doors of the mansion with my spine ramrod straight. I was wearing the same damp black sweater and jeans I had been wearing in Chicago, shivering slightly from the freezing rain, yet I felt 10 feet tall. Vincent led me through the cavernous, dimly lit hallways, our footsteps echoing against the marble floors like the ticking of a grandfather clock. We stopped in front of the massive mahogany doors leading to Taylor's primary study, the exact same room where he had shattered my heart and inadvertently forged my armor 3 weeks ago. Vincent did not knock. He simply turned the brass handle and pushed the doors open, stepping aside to let me enter. He didn't follow me in. The heavy doors clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the lion's den. The study looked like a literal war zone. The antique furniture was violently overturned. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves had been completely decimated, countless leather-bound volumes scattered across the Persian rug like fallen soldiers. The crystal decanters on the wet bar were shattered, staining the wood with the pungent aroma of expensive scotch. And standing by the massive window, silhouetted against the flash of lightning, illuminating the turbulent Atlantic Ocean outside, was Taylor Rossi. He was utterly unrecognizable from the meticulously groomed, unflappable mob boss I had known. He was not wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit. He wore a rumpled dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, sprawling ink of his syndicate tattoos. His hair was disheveled, his jaw coated in a thick, dark layer of unkempt stubble. But it was his eyes that truly terrified and captivated me. They were bloodshot, sunken, and burning with a frantic, unhinged fever. When he slowly turned around to face me, the air in the room felt suddenly thick enough to drown in. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. "You painted my city in blood," Taylor finally rasped, his voice a jagged, guttural ruin. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, moving with the heavy, unpredictable grace of a wounded predator. "You burned my casinos. You exposed my ports. You stripped $20 million from my Colombian accounts and paralyzed my entire eastern seaboard operation. For 3 weeks I have not slept. For 3 weeks I have butchered my way through the 5 boroughs, tearing down everything I built just to find you. I warned you." I replied, my voice remarkably steady, devoid of the trembling weakness that used to define me in his presence. "I left a note, Taylor. I told you exactly what I was. I meant nothing to you. And nothing is precisely what I gave you." He closed the distance between us in 3 massive, violent strides, stopping inches from my face. I could feel the heat radiating off his body, smelling the intoxicating mixture of rain, stale whiskey, and pure, unfiltered rage. He raised his hand, and for a split second, a ghost of the old Alex expected him to strike me. Instead, His large, calloused fingers reached up and gently, almost reverently traced the line of my jaw. It was the same gesture he had used the night he broke me, but the context had drastically shifted. The silence in the room stretched into a suffocating eternity, heavy with the ghosts of what we used to be. Taylor stared at me, his chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged rhythms. This was a man who had never been denied a sovereign ruler of a criminal underworld who tore down entire neighborhoods just to find a woman he claimed meant nothing to his life. Now that same woman was standing before him, not as a trembling captive, but as the architect of his absolute ruin. The sheer audacity of my presence seemed to fracture his remaining sanity completely. "You are a masterpiece," Taylor whispered, the venom in his voice entirely replaced by a dark, twisted awe. "I thought you were a pet. I thought you were a delicate little bird meant to sit in my cage and balance my books. I had no idea you were a dragon hiding in human skin. You did what the FBI, the Moretti family, and the Russian syndicates couldn't do in a decade. You brought me to my knees." He took another step forward, the sheer physical magnetism of his imposing frame attempting to pull me back into his toxic orbit. I held my ground, refusing to let my heartbeat betray the icy calm I projected. "I am not here to gloat, Taylor," I said, coldly, swatting his hand away from my face. The rejection made his jaw clench, a muscle feathering furiously under his skin. "I am here to negotiate my absolute, unconditional release." Taylor laughed, a harsh, barking sound, completely devoid of humor. "Release you think you can cripple my empire, humiliate me in front of the commission, and simply walk away? Isabella is gone. I exiled her the moment you disappeared. The marriage is off right now, forever." He stepped closer, his bloodshot eyes burning with unholy obsession. "The ports belong to me now by force. You proved you are the only woman worthy of standing at my side. You are not leaving Alex. You are going to stay here, and we are going to rebuild this empire together. You are going to be my queen." The sheer arrogance of his proposition was breathtaking. He truly believed his power could bridge the chasm he had carved into my soul. I looked at him with profound pity, realizing the man was entirely detached from his new grim reality today. "I think you misunderstand the current balance of power in this room," I stated flatly, taking a deliberate step back to establish a physical boundary. Before Vincent kicked in my door in Chicago, I initiated a decentralized automated fail-safe protocol on a secure Swiss server. It contains the comprehensive unredacted ledgers of every illegal transaction Rossi Enterprises has executed over the last 10 years. It contains the GPS coordinates of your heroin refineries, the offshore routing numbers for your political bribes, and the true identities of every corrupt judge on your massive payroll. His expression instantly froze into terror. The obsessive fever in his eyes was rapidly extinguished by a sudden, chilling realization of extreme tactical vulnerability. "It is set on a full-day countdown timer," I continued, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "If I do not physically log into a highly secure, randomized portal and enter a long, secure, alphanumeric passcode, a passcode that only exists inside my head, that server will automatically distribute the entire dossier to the federal government and every rival syndicate in North America. You will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal prison, provided the Moretti soldiers miss you." Taylor stared at me, his chest heaving as the horrifying reality of the trap closed its jaws around his throat. "If you lock me up, the timer runs out. If you torture me, the timer runs out. If you kill me, you kill yourself." I had not just put a gun to his head. I had strapped a bomb to his chest and swallowed the detonator. The untouchable Mafia boss had been comprehensively checkmated by the accountant he discarded. "What do you want?" He asked, the words forced out of his mouth like shattered glass from a broken, heavy window. It was the first time in his entire brutal life he had ever truly surrendered. I want complete, unmitigated freedom. I demanded, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I want $50 million in untraceable bearer bonds transferred into a secure briefcase within the next hour. I want your private jet fueled and prepped to fly me to Zurich, Switzerland. And most importantly, I want your sworn, unbreakable oath on your family's sacred grave that no one from your syndicate will ever look for me again. If I see a single shadow following me, I will unleash the hidden dossier. If I suspect for a fraction of a second that you have broken our truce, I will unleash the dossier from wherever I am hiding, and I will burn you to ashes. Taylor looked at me, a profound mixture of devastating loss and undeniable respect etched into his haggard features. He knew I was not bluffing. The girl who loved him was dead. The woman standing before him was a survivor who had learned exactly how to be ruthless from the absolute best. He walked over to his massive desk, heavily pulled open the bottom drawer, and paused quietly there. He retrieved a massive titanium-reinforced briefcase. He slammed it onto the mahogany surface and spun the combination locks, flipping it open to reveal neat, stacked rows of million-dollar bearer bonds. He had kept them as his ultimate emergency contingency. Now they were the price of his survival. He snapped the briefcase shut and slid it across the polished wood toward me. The sound echoed in the cavernous, destroyed room like a gavel slamming down on a block. It was the final verdict on our disastrous explosive history. "Take it," Taylor rasped, his voice trembling with heavy, undeniable emotion. "Take it and go. You have my word. I will never hunt you again. But know this, Alex. You can run to the ends of the earth. You can build an empire of your own, but you will never find another man who recognizes the true darkness inside of you the way I do." I looked at him, feeling the absolute truth of his words settle into my bones. "I am counting on it," I replied coldly. I picked up the heavy briefcase, the immense weight of it anchoring me to my new reality in this very strange, dark world. I did not offer him a final, lingering look of sorrow today. I simply turned on my heel and walked toward the massive mahogany doors. I pulled them open, stepping past Vincent Gallo, who looked at the briefcase in my hand and wisely stepped aside into the shadows. I walked out of the lion den, out of the fortified compound, and into the waiting armored vehicle that would take me to my jet. The rain had finally stopped giving way to a cold, clear night. I entered his world as a captive, but I left as a victorious living conqueror. Did Alex's ruthless escape and ultimate victory over Taylor leave you completely speechless? If you loved this intense, high-stakes Mafia romance drama, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow story lovers. We drop thrilling, heart-pounding stories just like this every single week, filled with dangerous twists, cunning betrayals, and truly unforgettable characters. Do not miss out on the next explosive chapter. Subscribe to our channel right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the action. Drop a comment below, telling us your absolute favorite part today.